The first crisp bite of autumn always brought us back to the woods. It was our tradition, a sacred pilgrimage into the heart of the forest, that began when Ethan and Emma were old enough to toddle around with their tiny backpacks and plastic flashlights. Each fall, we would disappear into the wilderness, just the three of us, bound together by the thin fabric of our tent and the glow of the campfire. But this year, something in the woods had shifted, like the forest itself had exhaled and in its breath carried the scent of decay. Just before dusk, the sun bleeding out its last light through the lattice of trees. The air was thick with the damp, earthy smell of the forest floor, and every sound felt magnified. The crunch of leaves underfoot, the distant caw of a crow, the whispering wind that threaded through the trees like a warning. Emma clung to my side as we walked, her small hand sticky with the remnants of the apple she'd eaten in the car.
"Dad, it's so quiet,"
she murmured, her voice barely louder than a breath. I nodded, though I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The woods were too quiet, too still, as if the usual hum of life had been swallowed up by the shadows. I glanced back at Ethan, who was dragging his feet, his gaze fixed on the darkening trees. He was getting older, edging closer to that age where the magic of childhood begins to fade, and I could see the uncertainty in his eyes, the way he kept glancing over his shoulder as if he expected to see something lurking just beyond the edge of his vision. We pitched the tent in our usual spot, a small clearing surrounded by towering pines that seemed to close in around us as the light faded. The ritual of setting up camp brought some comfort, a familiar rhythm to cling to in the growing unease. Ethan and Emma worked together to gather firewood, their laughter echoing in the clearing as they competed to see who could find the biggest stick. I forced a smile, trying to shake off the tension that had settled in my chest like a stone. The fire crackled to life as the last traces of daylight disappeared, casting flickering shadows that danced across the trees, making them appear taller, darker. We sat around the fire, the kids on either side of me, their faces illuminated by the warm glow. It should have felt safe, but the firelight only deepened the darkness beyond, turning the woods into a black void where anything could be hiding.
"Dad, tell us a scary story,"
Ethan demanded, his voice breaking the uneasy silence. He grinned up at me, his marshmallow sticky fingers clutching my sleeve.
"Yeah, but not the one about the hitchhiker,"
Emma added, her voice muffled by the blanket she had wrapped tightly around her small frame.
"We've heard that one 1,000,000 times."
I hesitated, staring into the flames. I told them all the usual campfire stories over the years, the ones that were just spooky enough to send a shiver down their spines, but wouldn't keep them up all night. But tonight, the usual stories felt too safe, too far removed from the thick silence of the woods around us. My mind kept circling back to a story my grandfather used to tell, one I'd buried deep because it had frightened me too much as a child. The words slipped out before I could stop them. "Have you ever heard about skinwalkers?" I asked, my voice low, almost as if I didn't want the trees to hear. Ethan's brow furrowed, clearly intrigued, but also wary.
"What's a skinwalker?"
I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. The fire seemed to dim, the shadows stretching longer as I searched for the right words, the same words my grandfather had used when he'd told me the story all those years ago. "They're these things that can take the shape of animals, or sometimes people. They wear their skins like costumes, but it's not just a disguise. They become them, but it's not really them, it's something else, something bad." Emma peeked out from under her blanket, her eyes wide and glistening in the firelight.
"So, it could be anybody?"
"Yeah," I whispered, more to myself than to them. "It could be anybody, and you wouldn't know. Not until it was too late." Ethan leaned in closer, his earlier bravado gone, replaced by a growing unease.
"Could it be you, Dad?"
I forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow in the thickening night air. "Nah, not me. You'd know if it was me, right?" Ethan didn't answer. He just stared at me, his eyes searching my face, looking for something, some sign that I wasn't who I said I was. The fire crackled loudly, sending a shower of sparks into the air, and we all jumped. I pulled the kids closer, trying to reassure them, but my own nerves were beginning to fray. "Don't worry," I said quickly, maybe too quickly. "It's just a story, like Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster, nothing to worry about."
But Grandpa said monsters are real. Grandpa always said the truth.
My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't thought about my father's stories in years, not since he'd passed away, taking his strange beliefs with him. But now, sitting in the darkness with my children, the memory of those stories came rushing back. Stories of things that lived in the shadows, waiting for the moment you let your guard down. "Grandpa liked to tell tall tales," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But that's all they were, stories. Skinwalkers aren't real." As the words left my mouth, the wind picked up, a sudden gust that sent a chill down my spine. The fire sputtered, and I felt the unease settle deeper into my bones, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. The woods were too quiet now, the kind of quiet that feels too deliberate, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, listening. I glanced at the kids, their faces pale in the dim light, their earlier excitement drained away, placed by a wariness that clung to them like the smoke in the air. "I'll be right back," I said, standing up and brushing off the damp leaves that clung to my jeans. "Just going to grab some more wood. Stay close to the fire, okay?" They nodded, their eyes wide and reflective, like animals caught in headlights. I gave them a reassuring smile, though my own nerves were starting to unravel. The woods felt wrong tonight, and it wasn't just the story I'd told. Something else was out there, something I couldn't name. I stepped away from the fire, the darkness swallowing me almost immediately. The trees pressed in close, their branches whispering against each other, a sound like bones rattling. My flashlight beam cut through the night in jittery sweeps, but the light seemed feeble against the encroaching dark. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent my heart racing. My mind conjured images of figures lurking in the shadows, their eyes glowing in the dark, waiting for the right moment to step into the light. I forced myself to move faster, grabbing a few pieces of wood and stacking them awkwardly in my arms. "Just a quick trip to the woodpile and back," I told myself. "Nothing out here but deer, maybe a raccoon or two." But even as I thought it, I felt a presence, something watching from the darkness just beyond the reach of my flashlight. The wind picked up again, stronger this time, and I heard it, a rustling in the underbrush, low and deliberate. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as I strained to listen. There it was again, closer now. A soft, dragging sound like something heavy being pulled across the ground. I swung the flashlight around, the beam slicing through the trees, but there was nothing there. Just the same old forest, the same shadows. I laughed nervously, shaking off the tension. Maybe it was just a deer or... A branch snapped behind me. I spun around, heart hammering in my chest, but again there was nothing. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating, pressing in on all sides. I started back toward the fire, my pace quickening, the wood nearly slipping from my grip. The darkness felt alive now, every shadow crawling, every sound amplified. I had to get back to the fire, back to the kids, but the feeling of being watched clung to me like something was following me just out of sight.
Dad?
Emma's voice froze me in place, but it didn't come from the direction of the fire. It came from deeper in the woods, where no one should have been. "Emma," I called out, my voice shaking, the flashlight beam swinging wildly as I searched the trees. "Sweetheart, where are you?"
Come here, Papa.
She called again, closer now, but something was wrong. Her voice was thin, stretched, like it had been pulled through layers of static. I took a step toward the sound, then stopped myself. My pulse was pounding in my ears, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. Emma was back at the fire. I'd just seen her, so how... A low growl rumbled from the shadows, making my blood run cold. My grip tightened on the flashlight, my knuckles white. The air was suddenly thick with the scent of earth and decay, a smell that turned my stomach and made my head swim.
Dad, do you think they're out there?
Ethan's voice came from behind me, the real Ethan, his voice sharp with fear. I didn't answer right away, my eyes fixed on the dark line of trees just beyond the firelight. Finally I shook my head, more to break the silence than because I believed it. "No, honey, it was just a story." But even as I said it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something somewhere was listening, and that it didn't care whether we believed or not. The fire had dwindled to a few flickering embers, barely enough to hold back the night. The darkness beyond our small circle felt thicker now, like it was pressing in, eager to swallow us whole. I could feel the kids huddling closer, their earlier excitement drained away, placed by a palpable fear that clung to the air like damp fog. "I'll be right back," I whispered, though my voice betrayed my own unease. The words felt fragile, as if they might shatter under the weight of the silence. I stood, the cold night air biting at my skin, and forced myself to step away from the fire. The woods felt different now, hostile in a way I couldn't quite explain. The trees loomed taller, their branches gnarled like twisted fingers, reaching out to snag at my clothes. Every sound seemed louder, more deliberate, as if the forest itself was alive, watching me with unseen eyes. I moved quickly, my breath coming in shallow bursts, the chill of the night seeping into my bones. A noise stopped me in my tracks, a rustle in the underbrush, low and deliberate. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing, my heart hammering in my chest. The flashlight beam swung around, sweeping across the trees, but there was nothing there. Just shadows. I laughed nervously, the sound hollow in the suffocating silence. Maybe it was just a deer, I thought, trying to calm myself. But even as I thought it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that something was out there, just beyond the reach of the light, watching. A branch snapped behind me, and I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. The darkness seemed to pulse, the shadows shifting as if they were alive, crawling over the ground toward me. I took a step back. The sound echoed in the silence, unnaturally loud, like the crack of a gunshot. For a long moment, nothing happened. The forest held its breath, waiting. Then, slowly, a figure stepped out of the shadows, emerging from the darkness like a predator stalking its prey. It was me, or at least it looked like me. The same hair, the same clothes, the same face. But something was wrong, something in the way it moved, jerky, stiff, like a marionette with tangled strings. Its eyes caught the light, reflecting it back too brightly, too sharply, like the eyes of a predator. And the smile it wore, a wide, too wide grin that stretched across its face, made my skin crawl.
"Papa?"
Emma's voice trembled from somewhere in the darkness. I knew it was the real Emma this time, but the figure in front of me mimicked her expression, tilting its head in that familiar way she did when she was confused. The thing took a step closer, its movements awkward, unnatural, as if it was still learning how to walk in my skin. "It's okay," it said, its voice a distorted echo of my own. "I'm here to take you home." My stomach churned, the bile rising in my throat. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt rooted to the ground. The thing took another step forward, and I could see the details now. The way its skin didn't quite fit right, the way its eyes gleamed too brightly, its smile stretched too far. It was an abomination, something that wore my face but wasn't me.
Dad? Dad?
Ethan's voice, small and terrified, cut through the fog of my fear. He was closer now, behind me, his footsteps hesitant as he approached. I couldn't let them see this. Whatever this thing was, I couldn't let it near my children. I forced myself to move, stepping between the thing and the kids, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. "Stay back," I rasped, my voice barely above a whisper. The flashlight beam wavered, catching the thing's two bright eyes again. It flinched, the smile faltering for just a moment before it stretched even wider, almost splitting its face in two. "We need to go," it said, its voice a sick parody of my own. "It's not safe here." The thing took another step forward, and I swung the flashlight in front of me, the beam cutting through the dark like a blade. The light seemed to sear its skin, and it recoiled with a hiss, a sound too animalistic to be human. For a moment, the forest echoed, the sound reverberating through the trees, and then silence. It stood there, its expression twisting into something almost like anger, its eyes narrowing as it watched me. I could feel the malice radiating from it, a cold, suffocating presence that made the air heavy and thick. The smell of decay filled my nose, turning my stomach, making my head spin. "Stay back," I shouted, finding my voice at last. The thing hesitated, its gaze flicking from me to the light and back again. Then, with a final, hateful glare, it melted back into the shadows, peering into the darkness of the forest. I stood there, the flashlight still raised, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The woods were silent again, as if nothing had happened, as if the thing had never existed. But I knew it was still out there, lurking just beyond the reach of the light, waiting for the right moment to strike.
Dad, are you okay?
I turned to face him, my legs shaky, my heart still racing. "I'm fine," I lied, trying to force a smile, but the words felt like ash in my mouth, and I knew he could see the fear in my eyes. "We need to leave," I said, my voice low and urgent. "Now!" Ethan nodded, his eyes wide and frightened, while Emma clung to me, her little hands gripping my jacket like a lifeline. We moved quickly, the fire now nothing more than a faint glow in the distance. The woods were silent, too silent, as if they were holding their breath, waiting for us to make a mistake. I led the way, the flashlight beam cutting through the thick darkness as we hurried along the narrow trail that led back to the car. Every step felt like an eternity. My mind raced, every instinct screaming at me to keep moving, to get the kids to safety. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone, that the thing was still out there, watching us, following us. I could feel its eyes on my back, could almost hear its too bright smile, stretching wider and wider like a wound that wouldn't close.
Dad, what if it's still following us?
I didn't answer. I couldn't. The truth was, I didn't know. My thoughts spiraled, fear constricting my chest like a vice. It wasn't just out there, it was everywhere, in the shadows, in the very air we breathed. Then, somewhere behind us, I heard it. "Run!" I hissed, gripping the kids' hands tighter, and we bolted forward, crashing through the underbrush. The trail twisted and turned, the path barely visible in the darkness, but I kept pushing forward, adrenaline driving me. The flashlight bobbed wildly in my hand, its beam swinging erratically as if it too was terrified of what might be out there. The thing was gaining on us. I could feel it, its presence bearing down like a physical weight on my shoulders. My breath came in ragged gasps, the cold air burning in my lungs. But I couldn't stop, couldn't let it catch us. Through the trees I saw it, the faint light of the parking lot, the car just ahead, salvation just out of reach. We burst into the clearing, and there it was, the car sitting exactly where we'd left it. I fumbled for the keys, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped them. The growling was so close now, I could feel it at my back, but I didn't dare look. I shoved the kids into the car, slamming the door behind them as I scrambled into the driver's seat. My fingers fumbled with the key, jamming it into the ignition on the second try. The engine roared to life, and I slammed my foot on the gas, the car lurching forward as we sped out of the clearing, the headlights slicing through the darkness. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of the figure standing at the edge of the trees, watching us go. It was me, but it wasn't. Its face was too pale, too stretched, the smile too wide. And those eyes, those awful, glowing eyes, followed us as we drove away, until the trees swallowed it up and it was gone. We didn't stop driving until we reached the outskirts of town. I pulled over at a gas station, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The kids were silent in the back seat, their faces pale, their eyes wide with lingering fear.
Are we safe now?
I wanted to say yes, to tell him everything was okay, but the truth lodged in my throat like a stone. I didn't know if we'd ever be safe again. The thing we'd seen in the woods, it wasn't something that could be easily explained away, something that could be forgotten. It was real, and it was out there somewhere waiting. "Yeah," I said finally, forcing the lie past my lips. "We're safe." But even as I said it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something, somewhere, was still watching us, and that it wouldn't stop until it had what it wanted. The drive back to the house was silent, the car's interior filled with the suffocating tension of unspoken fears. Every mile that passed brought us closer to the familiarity of home, yet the dread clung to us, possible to shake. The kids sat huddled together in the back seat, and I kept my grip tight on the steering wheel. The image of that thing, my twisted double, burned into my mind. When we finally reached the house, I ushered Ethan and Emma inside quickly, locking the door behind us with trembling hands. The house felt different now, the walls too thin, the windows too exposed. The sense of safety I once felt here had vanished, placed by a gnawing fear that the thing from the woods had followed us, was perhaps already here, inside with us. I turned on every light in the house, flooding the rooms with harsh artificial brightness, trying to push back the darkness that seemed to seep in from the corners. The kids followed me silently, their small faces pale, their eyes haunted. "Go to your rooms," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor I felt in my bones. "Try to get some sleep. I'll keep watch." They didn't argue, just nodded and hurried to their rooms, closing the doors behind them with a finality that sent a chill down my spine. I watched them go, a part of me wanting to follow, to keep them close. But I knew I had to confront this thing alone. Whatever it was, it had worn my face, spoken with my voice. It had already come too close to my children. I settled into the living room, the harsh light casting long shadows that stretched across the floor. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that feels unnatural, deliberate. I sat in my chair, my eyes scanning the room, the walls, the windows, as if expecting the thing to step out of the shadows at any moment. Time passed slowly, each tick of the clock echoing in the oppressive silence. My thoughts spiraled, racing through memories of the day, of the story I'd told by the campfire, of the thing that had appeared in the woods. It had worn my face, but it was something else entirely, something ancient, malevolent, and patient. As the hours dragged on, I felt the weight of exhaustion pressing down on me, my eyes heavy, my body aching from the tension. But I couldn't sleep. I couldn't let my guard down, not when that thing was still out there. Then, just as I began to wonder if it was all in my head, I heard it, a faint scratching sound coming from the front door. My heart leapt into my throat, and I jumped to my feet. The sound continued, soft but insistent, like claws dragging slowly across wood. I took a step toward the door, my breath coming in shallow, shaky gasps. The scratching stopped abruptly, replaced by a soft, rhythmic tapping. I froze, my mind racing. It was trying to get in. It was here. But when I reached the door and peered through the peephole, there was nothing, just the dark, empty porch. I exhaled slowly, backing away from the door, but then from the direction of the back door, I heard the same tapping, soft but deliberate. I turned slowly, the realization creeping over me like ice water. It wasn't trying to get in, it was already inside. I moved through the house, the tapping sound echoing in the silence, growing louder with each step. It wasn't coming from the doors anymore. It was coming from the walls, from the very structure of the house, as if the thing was inside the walls, trying to find a way out. I stopped in the hallway, the tapping now a jarring noise, the walls vibrating with it. The house felt alive, pulsing with a malicious energy that seemed to seep from the very foundations. Without warning, it began. A voice that wasn't a voice at all. A low, guttural whisper that slithered through the walls, through my mind. "Come to me." It wasn't a command. It was a statement, a simple truth that cut through the fear and the doubt. The thing wasn't just here. It had always been here, waiting, watching. Was it part of us now, woven into the fabric of our lives, our very beings? I stumbled back, the realization crashing over me in a wave of cold terror. It wasn't just my face it had taken. It was becoming me, and I could feel it inside my head, pushing, probing, looking for a way to take over completely. I had to get out. I had to take the kids and run, but where could we go? This thing was everywhere, in the walls, in the air, in my own mind. We are trapped. But then I thought of my kids, their small faces, Their wide eyes and a fierce protectiveness surged through me, cutting through the fear. I couldn't let it take them. I wouldn't. I turned and ran to their rooms, throwing open the doors. "We need to leave now!" I shouted, my voice ragged with desperation. But when I looked inside, I saw them standing there side by side, staring at me with wide, empty eyes. Their faces were pale, too pale, and their smiles were stretched too wide, like the thing in the woods.
Come to us, Papa.
They said in unison, their voices thin, distorted, like an echo of something that had never been real. I staggered back, my mind reeling. It had taken them. Or maybe it had always been them. Maybe the thing had never been in the woods at all. Maybe it had always been here, in the very blood of my family, waiting for the moment to reveal itself. "No," I whispered, the word trembling on my lips. But even as I said it, I could feel it, something crawling under my skin, something pushing against the walls of my mind, trying to break through. Again they called,
Come to us, Papa.
their smiles widening, their eyes glowing with that awful, unnatural light. I stumbled back, turning and running down the hallway, the walls closing in around me, the tapping now a deafening roar. I reached the front door and threw it open, the cold night air hitting me like a slap in the face. But when I looked back, the house was gone. The woods were gone. There was nothing but darkness, an endless void stretching out in all directions. I was alone, trapped in the blackness, with only the thing inside my mind for company. "Come to me," the voice whispered again, soft and insistent. And I realized then that there was no escape. The thing had already taken everything. My family, my home, my life. There was nothing left to fight for, nothing left to protect. It was over. I fell to my knees, the cold seeping into my bones, the darkness closing in. I could feel it now, the thing moving through me, becoming me, filling the empty spaces where my thoughts had once been. And as the last of the light faded from my mind, I heard the thing's voice, clear and triumphant, as it whispered one final command: "Sleep." And I obeyed.